and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, listed in 2020 as number 8 of 42 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am your host, Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert and author of Business Evolution, Creating Growth in a Rapidly Changing World. I created Scale Your Sales framework to develop leading edge capabilities to secure, retain, and grow key customer relationships for long-term value and partnership. Join me each week to learn from amazing B2B sales and business experts and influencers. Tune in for actionable insights and strategies. Are you ready to scale your sales?
Hello and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast. Now, my next guest is Gopalakrishna. He describes himself as a humble human being committed to elevating B2B buyer experience and enabling B2B sales success. He has over 20 plus years global experience with startups, scale-ups, mid-market vendors, which has helped him with learning by doing and failing and succeeding all of these strategies that he's put together to be named one of the top 100 sales influencers to follow globally by Celsa. Being an advisor, an investor, an entrepreneur, a speaker, an author, and a lifelong learner, Gopalakrishna has an authentic perspective on life and on business. So welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, and you like to be called Kris.
Thank you. Thank you, Janice. Thank you for having me here. I'm really, really excited to be talking to you. And yes, I'm all here.
Well, let's start by really talking about what you uniquely do for your clients, because what I was particularly interested is your link between customer experience and sales, which is something I really focus on at Scale Your Sales. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
See, essentially, pandemic or pre-pandemic, as we all know, the buyer's journey has been evolving. And the pandemic has only accelerated the evolution of how buyers actually make purchase decisions, right? So it is super important that you as a seller is part of that buyer journey at a very, very early stage so that you can actually influence and persuade the buyer with your narrative. So it is as difficult for a buyer to make purchase decisions as it is for a seller to be able to sell. So therefore, as a seller, it is extremely important that you be the part of that buyer journey at a very, very early stage of their journey.
That's interesting because there are stats, and they're not necessarily correct to say that buyers are not interested in working with sellers. And if they are, then it's at a very late stage because they're all online, they're doing their own research. So, you come in when they're 70% already through the buying process. But what you're saying is there's a real advantage to getting in and having that relationship and giving them the experience early on in their buying process. Would that be correct?
Absolutely right. So according to Gartner, it may be a revelation. 77% of buyers have rated their most recent purchase as either difficult or complex. Yeah. So buying is not easy. Yeah. So what happens is when you're part of the buyer journey very early, on the left side of the sales cycle or the buyer journey, what you're doing is you are a co-passenger in the journey to your buyer, right? So with that, you could actually help them educate about the possible solutions. You could influence their, their buying decision with your narrative by deeply embedding yourself into their business environment. And then you have multiple opportunities to interact with your buyers, which is not true if you were, getting in after the 70% of decisions already made. So you have a very little chance, right? So that's why you shift left to the buyer journey, not to the right, because you will be too late in the game.
Right, right. So tell me more about Winsight, sales growth platform. How does that affect what you've just been talking about? How does that get you in early?
So we do the outreach at scale for our customers who are going after their ideal customers and buyers. So we use data, we use intent data, right? We use the power of content, data analytics, AI to be able to execute these reach out at scale. So when you use the power of data and the intent data, you are essentially embedding yourself into B2B buyer journey at a very early stage, because your ideal customers have more than baseline level of interest on a given topic of your interest as a seller. When you have that power of intent data, then you make your move to time your outreach, then you're part of that early stage of buyer journey. That is what our platform does as a sales growth platform, to leverage data, intent data, data analytics, AI, and execution at scale. And guess what? We do that all in a done for you model. So customers need not have to execute.
So if it's in a done for you model, how does that interact with the other platforms that the organization might have?
So what happens is, most of the organizations do not have a true platform that can enable multiple aspects of, let's say, account-based engagement at scale, right? Because you have to subscribe to a data tool, you have to subscribe to an intent data tool, you have to subscribe to a sales sequencing tool, you have to subscribe to a content rendering tool, and then you have to integrate all of this, and then somebody got to be executing all of it. So this is not something that a scale up or even a mid-market vendor or a seller could afford, right? So what they do these in a piecemeal approach, and obviously the results are also less than expected. So what we do is we orchestrate the entire sales outreach with all of these pieces of the puzzle coming together, and then we do the execution. So there's a less of resource consumption from the customer.
So how did this platform come about? Did you see that there was sales organizations had all of these fragmented systems, and they needed something to pull it all together so that you could get the intent data and react to that? What was the impetus behind creating this platform?
So as a deliberate strategy, I have, with 20 years of experience, I've learned a thing or two. The scale-ups and the mid-market vendors do not necessarily have the wherewithal to get this all working together. It could be a lack of resources in terms of people, in terms of skills, in terms of technology tools, right? And in terms of overall know-how to execute all these things together. Now, where we come in is we take that complete burden away from the customer, and then create this sales growth platform by bringing all pieces together and then doing the execution for the customer. So it's a complete last mile approach to the customer. So I found that there is a huge gap in the market, because a lot of people want to sell their tools and then make the subscription as a model, but we do not want to do that. We want to not only give the tool but also execute on the behalf of the customer. So that's how.
So explain to me the done for you. So you've got the tool, and what you mean done for you. So you do the execution. So what do you give back to the customer? What do they, your vendors that will work with their customers, what do they get back?
The outcome of what we do is the qualified conversations and the conversions from the ideal customers and buyers of our customers, right? Yeah. So everything that we do translates into a ready to scale opportunities for our customers. Yeah. And where we exit is when the selling actually begins by our customers. So the prospecting, the qualifying, the persuasion to get the positive response to your outreach, all of that is done by us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the heavy lifting that we do for our customers.
Right, I see. Excellent. All right, well, let's switch it up a little bit and talk about the industry in general. And what we both focus on is being very, key accounts, making sure that the accounts are very much customer centric, and evolving the sales process to make sure it's very much focused on the customer. And so I'm sure you like I have come across so many organizations that are still very much focused on the sales process rather than the buying process. And, they're very targeted on hitting the numbers. So what I'd like to understand from you is your view on whether the sales industry, B2B sales, has shifted enough to be buyer-centric. And what do you say to those organizations if they haven't shifted in order to move them further along?
Look, it's a buyer's world. Yeah. Buyers are in a driver's seat, right? That is not to say buying is any way easier than selling, right? Now, if you are only sales centric, all the best, because most of the smart companies have realized you sell more by aligning yourself to a buyer than having a pure play sales approach. So the way I say is there is empathy, there is authority, and there is a credibility. What do I mean by that? You align to your customer at a multiple levels: organization, strategic priorities, challenges, key initiatives, and including the individual role level. Yeah. And then you demonstrate your authority by showing the depth in a specific area of your expertise. Yeah. That can be only one or at best two. It can't be more than that. So you demonstrate the authority through the depth. And the credibility comes in by showcasing the evidence as to where you have done. Somebody who is comparable to your target buyer, right? Somebody who's a peer, competitor, right? So by having the empathy, authority, and credibility, you're actually selling better to your buyers rather than only sales-centric approach. Yeah. So it's alignment at multiple levels, and it's a depth, and it's about evidence-based selling. I believe that is the way going forward.
Interesting. Excellent. Okay, so what practical, because you've already just given us one actually, but what practical strategy would you offer the listeners here to enable their buyers to buy? So you've given us that one. Have you got another practical strategy that you could offer?
So one thing I would say is understand the overall buyer and the buyer's organization holistically, right? Always think the end goal, begin with the end in mind. What do I mean by that? What is that you can enable your customer to achieve? That's an ultimate goal. Yeah. Begin with the end in the mind. Not many of us do that. When you have set a vision for the customer and then work backwards to let them know how you can help them realize to that vision. Yeah, it's extremely important that you set the vision for the customer, of course, based on the alignment with their strategic priorities, and then show them how you can help them achieve that vision by progressive approach. Yeah. So if you can do only that by setting the vision and then showing the end goal first and then working backwards, that is a very, very different conversation you're having with your customers, as opposed to everybody else who just focused on a point solution, specific transactional approach, as opposed to transformational approach.
Yeah, and this is, I talk about becoming you're a business advisor. Your focus is on the whole business, and you've just mentioned holistically, and rather than selling a product. And I think that salespeople miss out on lots of opportunities when they're focused on selling a product, because they're not really actively listening. And there's a lot that our customers tell us that if we think of co-creating, sitting around the table and looking at solving problems, which is what we're there to do, and the problem we're wanting to help them solve is how, as you say, the end in mind, how they're going to reach their goal. And this is how we can play a part to get you to where you want to be. But it's not selling a product. You may not even have the product, but it's about having that conversation to co-create with the customer. And I think that's a different mindset. Would you agree?
Absolutely. That's the way forward. That is because buyers are very, very sophisticated. They have more access to information. They have more access to insights. They have more access to intelligence in the market. They're much more savvy than you and I realize as sellers, right? So do not underestimate the intellect and the homework of a buyer, right? So that is the reason why you being able to align to them and say, this is how specifically we can help you achieve your specific vision or a strategic objective. You cannot do everything, but you can pick one and then specifically go after that. That's enough for you to have a long-term alignment with your customers.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm really interested in you and your background. I know that you've worked globally with many organizations, whether it's from SaaS, software, all over the world, and you work in many markets now. So I'd like your perspective on diversity and the way that has evolved, and what you feel needs to happen now.
See, I have a pet peeve.
Please share it.
If I may say that. So most of the organization, diversity is confined to demography. Yeah. So I believe diversity should truly be not only demography, but also it is to do with the psychography. What do I mean by that? You need to bring in people who have radically different perspective as opposed to you, right? By, not only by cultural background, but also from the experience background. People who have been part of startups, people who have been part of a completely non-business industry, such as an NGO, people who have been part of academics, right? People who have been part of social service. When you bring in this diversity, then you can see that you are creating a much more vibrant and diversified workforce, as opposed to homogeneity and diversity by demography. So that I have seen very, very few companies ever go down that path, except very, very few. So I believe this is about to change, and it must change.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I was speaking to a VP of IBM, and they were saying, and it's really difficult. We're asking a lot from organizations. It's difficult for them to do, because it's one thing, you think of cultural diversity or gender diversity and physical diversity. And but then when you're thinking of experiential diversity, then, it's very difficult just for the culture, that other people within that organizational culture to accept someone. Well, I've got my degree. What are they doing sitting next to me? Why do they have a voice? It's quite challenging that you're asking organizations, but from a creative point of view, oh my gosh, that's just massive, the impact that it can have. So I agree with you that would be lovely to go there. So the IBM, what they looked at is an entry level. It was college. I mean, it's the US system. So it's a college certification was an entry level. And they stopped having that as an entry level because actually it was a block. It was a barrier to people that didn't have that. And it didn't mean that they were any less. They just, for whatever reasons, whether economic or, the environment, they just didn't have that. And so I think that that's a way of actually challenging entry level, allowing people into the organization that may not come from traditional academic backgrounds. Is there another way that you think organizations can start to do this? Because it's asking quite a lot, isn't it? It's really challenging for them.
So I think we have to make a beginning, and global leaders such as IBM, must show us the way, right? You may not do that for every role that you're hiring, but you may do that a certain percentage of the roles which are more naturally fit to that kind of a diversity, right? So that's probably is the first step, right? And then you learn by doing, right? Once you have that kind of a diversity, it is actually helping you become truly vibrant, or it is hindering you from running your own business. You could only learn that by doing it, right? So therefore, specific roles in specific functions can be a starting point, right? But I have seen, almost without exception, all the hiring managers want the homogeneity of their new hires. That is such a disservice. So you want everybody who is a look-alike. Then where is the diversity here?
Yeah.
Right. So, but I'm not naive to believe that business can be run by radically shifting your policies. No, you experiment and see how it works in a very, very subset of your hiring, and then learn from it to double down it or tone it down, whatever suits in your business ecosystem. That's what I would say.
Yeah. When we're talking about sales, we're talking about global sales. I think because we're online, you need to reflect your sales force, your company's talent pool must reflect that global diverse market that you may want to grow into, and you won't be able to grow into it unless you actually have that creativity within your organization to start to push and move you out of your traditional box. So if you're continuing to grow and evolve, that's how you do it, from bringing in new ideas. So I think that no one has actually come up with that, your point of being as diverse as that as an organization. But I love that idea. So thank you for contributing that. So let me ask you, who is your hero or shero?
Sir Richard Branson.
Why?
He fascinates me as a human being. I have never seen any human being who's as insanely risk taker as he is. And I've read his book, autobiography, Losing My Virginity. I don't know how many times, I lost count, right? How could one particular individual can make such radically risky business decisions and yet succeed at a massively global scale? And how can the same individual take adventurous life risks and then go on uncharted territories by putting his life at risk and yet coming out successfully and surviving, and keep going back and then taking those risks, including the recent spaceship to the space.
Yeah.
That is astonishingly awe-inspiring for me. So, which is why he's my all-time favorite idol.
He is an inspiration, isn't it? Many of us think of these things, but we don't actually do it. We won't go quite so far and risk. So yeah, thank you. That's interesting, and long may he live and continue to challenge the boundaries and stereotypes, which is one thing I think he's known for. Okay, so how can listeners get hold of you?
So very simple. kris@winsights.co. That's the best way to reach me. Drop me a note and happy to respond and then catch up with you.
Excellent.
Listeners. Yeah.
And I'm sure they will be putting all the links in the show notes. So thank you for being a guest of Scale Your Sales podcast, Gopalakrishna.
Thank you, Janice. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Scale Your Sales. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, Janice B. Gordon, to comment and share. I'd love it if you would leave a review on ratethispodcast.com/scaleyoursales. Please subscribe for more weekly expert insights to scale your sales.